Hello learners. So, we are back to this lecture wherein we will be discussing about externalities. The previous lecture, we had talked about market failure, wherein we had talked about the various reasons for market failure. Amongst that, a very important reason was about externalities. So, today in this lecture, we will be talking about the types of externalities. Also, we will have a graphical representation of the externalities of production, as well as graphically we'll understand that what happens in case of externalities of consumption. Now, we have been talking about externalities. We have said that externality is kind of a spillover which occurs when an exchange between a buyer and a seller has an impact on the third party who's not a part of this exchange. So if buyers and sellers are interacting in the market and producing and consuming something, and its impact is on another person or another party who is nowhere related in this exchange process, so that impact is called as an externality. We've already understood in the previous lecture that the externalities can be both positive or it can be negative. An example of a negative externality can be the waste discharged by a paper mill in a nearby stream. Investment in beautification of a personal garden, which raises the neighborhood property value, is a positive externality. Further, these externalities can also be divided on the basis of how they are consumed or how they are produced. So, an example of a consumption externality is vaccination of a communicable disease by an individual. That is, if an individual is getting himself or herself vaccinated or immunized against a communicable disease, he is stopping the transmission of that disease to the other parties. So, that is a consumption externality, positive consumption externality. Similarly, externality can be with respect to production. For example, a beekeeper's production of honey, so he is getting into the process of beekeeping in order to produce honey. So there may be a production of honey and there may be a consumer of honey, but the nearby farms are getting benefited because of the pollination done by these bees. That is a production externality. Now, whenever we talk about externality, there are two important concepts which we have to understand. One is called as marginal social cost, other is called as marginal private cost. Both the costs are important whenever we have to define an externality. Let us start with what is marginal private cost. Marginal private cost represents the additional cost incurred by an individual or a firm for producing one more unit of good or service. That is, in normal course, if you are a producer and you decide to produce one extra unit of something which you are producing, extra cost that you are incurring as an individual or as a firm for production of that extra unit of any good or service, that is called as marginal private cost. Marginal private cost only considers the private cost which is borne by the producer. So, if I am a producer and I am making, let us say, certain pens, so what is the cost of producing that extra pen is called as marginal private cost. So, as a producer, I am only concerned that what is the cost which I am bearing, what is the cost of the raw material, what is the cost of labor, what is the cost of other, let us say, fuel charges, electricity, that all is what I am concerned with. That is called as marginal private cost. The other cost is marginal social cost. As the name is indicating, here we will be talking about what is happening to the society by the production of this good. So, marginal social cost not only includes the private cost which is borne by the producer, but it also talks about the external cost this production has on the society as a whole. That is, if I am producing and because of my production, certain pollution is taking place, so when I account for the cost of pollution that is happening because of the private production, that when I include in my cost, that is called as marginal social cost. So it includes not only the private cost, it is also talking about the external cost which is imposed on the society as a whole. Marginal social cost therefore represents the true cost of production to the society, and it is accounting for the externalities. So whatever externalities, see, as I gave the example of externalities, you may be contributing positively to the third party in your production process, or you may be contributing negatively in the production process. So when we account for, when we adjust for this externality, negative externality or the positive externality, in this private cost, what we get is called as your social cost. So whenever we will be talking about cost associated now, we will be differentiating between the private cost and the social cost. Now this cost, that is the marginal private cost and marginal social cost, will be talking about or will be taking into consideration the impact of externalities. If there is no externality, and in case of a competitive market equilibrium, the social value will be equal to the private value. Similarly, social cost will be equal to the private cost because my consumption or my production is not giving any benefit or it is not imposing any cost to the third party. Hence, my social cost becomes equal to private cost. Similarly, the social benefit becomes equal to the private benefit. But when there is an externality involved in this production or the consumption, then there is a divergence in the marginal and the social values. That is, in that case, my marginal benefit will be different from social benefit. My marginal cost will be different from social cost. When this externality, we have seen that the externalities can be negative or they can be positive. If there are negative externalities, then the marginal private cost will be less than the marginal social cost. Why? Because if I am producing, let us say again the paper mill example which we have been discussing, in my private cost, I'm only taking into account that what is the extra cost of producing that extra paper. I'm not taking into account that if I'm throwing that effluent in the nearby stream, what damage is this causing to the ecosystem. I'm not taking into account the cost which is there because of which people maybe are getting some kind of a skin disease. That cost I'm not incurring. But in case of a negative externality, this social cost is higher than the private cost. So always in case of a negative externality, the marginal private cost is less than the marginal social cost. This happens because the producer is not bearing this social cost. It is being borne by the people who are facing the damage because of this business activity. Then, when we talk about positive externalities, marginal private cost is greater than the marginal social cost. Why? Because this is generating more social benefits than the private benefits. Let us take the case of the beekeeper. So beekeeper is only talking about the cost it is incurring for keeping that bee and extracting that honey from them, whatever it is there. But the benefit those bees are creating to the nearby farm owners because of the pollination, that is not accounted for. So the social benefits are more than the private benefits. In positive externality, therefore, there is again a divergence between the private cost and the social cost. And in this case, your marginal private cost is more than the marginal social cost. Whatever the case may be, whether it is a negative externality or it is a positive externality, it may lead to either overproduction or underproduction. Therefore, we say that externality is a reason for market failure because it is not producing the goods at their optimal level. There may be overproduction or there may be underproduction. Before going further into the graphical representation, learners, I am showing this picture to you and asking you a question. Now, this is showing you a road where there is a huge increase in the traffic. My question to you is, why would increased vehicular traffic be considered as a positive externality by some and negative by others? Why is it that some people will view this increased vehicular traffic as a positive externality and others as a negative externality? What do you think will be the reason for this? The reason is that all those people who are having petrol pumps nearby, for them, increased vehicular traffic will give them greater business. So for them, it is a positive externality. Whereas the air pollution or the noise pollution it is creating there is a negative externality. So a same situation may be a positive externality or it may be a negative externality. So our work as environmental economists or students of environmental economics is to analyze that whatever is happening on the ground, whether to what extent it is creating a positive externality and to what extent it is creating a negative externality and which effect is overweighing. If the negative externality is overweighing the positive externality, we will not encourage this increased vehicular traffic. So that is a food for thought. Now coming to our negative externalities, graphical representation. We will first be taking into account negative externality. We have already seen negative externality means that there is increased cost to the society because of this production. Now let us say that this supply is, let us say this is the quantity of aluminium. Here we are measuring quantity of aluminium. Okay, we are measuring the quantity of aluminium on your x-axis and we are measuring the price of aluminium on the y-axis. Demand for aluminium is downward sloping, that is, when the price reduces, more demand is there. Supply is upward sloping. We have not taken into account any kind of externality. We are just talking about a situation where demand or this interaction is happening between buyers and sellers. So you get an equilibrium price which is P market and quantity which is Q market. Now, because this aluminium is being produced, it is causing some pollution. That cost of pollution is a negative externality. Hence, you get a supply curve which is representing this social cost. Now, this social cost is shifting the supply curve upwards. Correct? Because social cost is more than the private cost. What is going to happen is, if we now take this externality into picture of pollution, your private cost is different from social cost because private cost is not equal to social cost. So, your purple curve, upward sloping curve, is the social cost of production of aluminium. Now, your curve, demand curve is going to meet this social cost curve at this point which we have marked as optimum. What do we see? At this optimum point, the quantity optimum is less than the quantity market and also the price of the market is less than the price in the optimum situation. Or in other words, what is happening is, because of this externality, we are seeing overproduction happening. Because production of aluminium is causing pollution, the society would desire less of aluminium production. But we are producing QM, which is greater than quantity which is optimal. Also, we are selling it at a lower price than it should have been, because if we want to account for this cost of pollution, we have to pass it in form of the higher prices. So, a negative externality is leading to overproduction. Only when we take into consideration the social cost, we will realize that what should have been the optimum quantity, it should have been less than what the market has decided. So here, market has failed to allocate the resources optimally. Otherwise, if markets would have taken into account this social cost, it would have said that the equilibrium is at Q optimum and not at Q market. So if we are taking market, leaving it to perfect situation, we are talking about higher production of something which is not socially desirable. Similarly, we can also see a negative externality in consumption. Again, let us say we are measuring quantity of alcohol. Okay, we are talking about quantity of alcohol on the x-axis and price of alcohol on the y-axis. So this is the demand of alcohol and this is the supply. Now there is some cost associated with drinking, because excessive drinking can not only do your health damage, it also creates certain social problems. So therefore, this demand is not taking into account this externality which is caused by drinking. When we take into account this cost of drinking, we see that the demand curve shifting inside, because socially the demand of alcohol should be less compared to the demand which the individual privately are making. So we see that the demand curve coming down, we see a purple line. What happens now is that in this case also, the equilibrium is at that point optimum, where the actual quantity of alcohol should be less than what actually the market is allocating. So, a negative externality, either in production or in consumption, is overproducing that particular good or service. If we take into account that negative externality and we take into account the social cost, then we will see that market should have been producing less than what it is producing. Now, after understanding the negative externality, let us have a look at the positive externality in production, and then we will have a look at the positive externality in consumption. Now, again we see here is, let us say, the quantity of robots. This is the quantity of robots that we are having on the x-axis, and we are having price of robots on the y-axis. Equilibrium is at this point E. Now, there is certain advantages of this new technology, which is the value of the technology spillover. Because we have developed a new technology, this technology is going to benefit others also. There will be a spillover of that technology, because of which the social cost will be less than the private cost. So we see that the curve is shifting. So you come to an optimum point wherein the production should have been more than currently what the production is. So you see the difference? Here the markets on their own are producing less than what the society desires. So if we take into account this positive externality of production, we should have been producing more at a lower cost. So this means all those production processes which are creating positive externalities, if they are left on the market, market will make them produce less than what the society desires. Hence, we have to take into account this social cost when we are making a production decision in such a case. Similarly, we can have positive externality in consumption as well. Let us say here we are having the quantity of education. That is, education is also creating positive impact in the market. So when people are consuming or studying more, if this was the initial, and we are assuming the market for education as a normal market, which is generally not. So if this is the equilibrium, this is the market price of education, and this is the quantity of education, which is by the supply and demand in the private. Now, because education creates human capital, we see that you get a social value like this. This goes to your supply curve changes. You see a change in the equilibrium, and you see that more should have been produced compared to what is actually being produced. Because value of education is creating human capital, it is giving certain advantages to the society. So both negative and positive externalities in production and consumption are leading to market failure. Until unless through policy intervention we correct this externality, the market will not allocate the resources the way they should have been. Hence, whenever we talk about environmental goods, we talk about these externalities, and then we advocate that the government needs to intervene in such a way that negative externalities, if there are in production or consumption, they should be reduced by policy intervention, by reduction in the quantities of their production. On the other hand, if certain processes of production and consumption are creating positive externalities, we should encourage more production of it, because that is required by the society. So let us do a small brain teaser by a small true and false quiz. I'm giving you a statement and you have to say whether this statement is true or false. The first is, an example of positive externality of consumption is vaccination against contagious diseases. I have given this example all through my lecture. What is this example of positive externality of consumption? If somebody takes a vaccination against contagious diseases? True, it is. Second, when negative externalities are present, the market tends to overproduce the goods because marginal social cost exceeds the marginal private cost. We have just seen it graphically. If there is negative externalities, then the markets tend to overproduce the goods. Is it true? No. Then marginal social cost includes all cost imposed on the society, including externalities. The answer will be right, because it is taking into account what? It is taking into account the cost which are also borne by the society. So let us quickly revise this lecture. We say externalities involve crucial public issues such as pollution, traffic jams, education, scientific research, etc. Negative externalities beyond social optimum leads to too much production, and positive externalities lead to less of what is being produced. So that is all we have to do today. And next lecture, we will be talking further about public goods. I hope you are enjoying this course of environmental economics. Take care. All the best.